Hey, I'm going to show you how you can take your CAS room from this to this. Stick around, stay tuned. Okay, so this video is inspired by Lil Dika's old school CAS room and that One Green Leaf's CAS background tutorial video. And after I watched that One Green Leaf's video, I thought to myself, I wonder if I can build a 3D room mesh for CAS. So then I made this video as like a walkthrough of my process. Okay, to do this, I used 3 programs: Blender for 3D modeling the room, Sims 4 Studio for the game package file, and then I used GIMP to create the texture image for the model. In Sims 4 Studio, we're going to create an object by finding a CAS room object. So click this button here, object. Then in the search box, we're going to type CAS room and check the show debug items. Once we click the next button here at the bottom, we'll get a prompt to create a package file. I'm going to call it JoyCAS Toot. For easier testing, I'm going to put this file in a folder within my mods folder. You should be able to find your mods folder in Documents, Electronic Arts, Sims 4, and then Mods. After the package file opens, we're able to see the current CAS room. In the Texture tab, we'll see 3 textures for the model, 2 diffuse textures and 1 normal texture. We're going to make changes to the 2 diffuse textures. We don't really need to make any changes to the normal texture. Within the Mesh tab, we can see how many meshes are attached to this object. Currently, this object has 1 mesh, 1 LOD 0 and 1 Shadow 0 mesh. In the Warehouse tab, you can see that each object has an instance ID number. Both textures for the object are defined in the model, and the instance ID will show you how that texture is defined within Sims 4 Studio. When you select the model, a Data tab will appear on the right, and you want to scroll down until you see LODs and select the blue Edit Items button. High Detail Flags is where you'll define the mesh. On the right next to meshes, select Edit Items. Scroll down until you see Shader and change the shader from Fong Alpha to Flat Mirror. In a bit, I'll show you how this is mapped within the model. For the Flat Mirror shader, we'll need to define the mirror plane normal and mirror plane offset, but we're going to do this later on in this walkthrough. For now, just leave it as it is and save your package file. When we go back to the Studio tab, we look at the 2 textures. The Fong Alpha is still there. It's not going to change to Flat Mirror until you close the package file. So for now, just ignore that part. Select Export Mesh to create our Blender file. You can name it whatever. This is where we're going to modify the 3D mesh. Now going back to the Texture tab, we can see our 2 diffuse textures. This is what they look like. We're going to go back into the Warehouse tab and look for those instance IDs within the model. So select Model. On the right, select the Data tab, go back to LODs, Edit Items. Within High Detail Flags, we're going to go back on the right to Meshes and select Edit Items. Now to see the image textures that's attached to the Full Bright texture, we're going to scroll down on the right to Full Bright until we see Material next to Items. We're going to select Edit Items, and the instance ID of the image file that is attached to this texture will appear in the diffuse map as the last segment. So the 851 ID number is matching to the first image we see on the left. Same thing with the Flat Mirror. When we go into the details for the Flat Mirror, we can see that the image texture file that's attached to this Flat Mirror mesh is the circular image. So we want to keep that in mind when we're in Blender and editing the meshes. I'm going to save my file and open a new instance of Sims 4 Studio. I know that I want a mirror in my CAS room, so I'm going to find a mirror within Sims 4 Studio. I'm going to pick Standalone Recolor and select Object. And in the search bar, I'm going to just type Mirror and select the mirror that I want and click Next. I only need the mesh and texture, so the name of the file won't matter. Just give it any name. I'm going to call my file Test. Alright, so we want to go back into the Studio tab, and now we want to download our mirror mesh. So in the Meshes tab, I just selected Load 1 Medium. I don't know why, but that's just what I picked. Click Export and make your object the name of your file because you're going to need to reference this later. I'm just going to name this file Mirror. To get our texture image, go to the Texture tab. You can see that the first diffuse texture is a blank alpha image. That's our mirror glass. I'm just going to export it and name it Mirror Glass. The second diffuse texture is your mirror frame, so I'm going to do the same process, export it and name it Mirror Frame. Find the mirror glass image and open it in GIMP. I'm going to basically add some color so that we can see the glass when we're in Blender and editing the mirror. It won't affect the mirror in Sims 4 Studio because we've already defined that mesh as a flat mirror in Sims 4 Studio. So in GIMP, I'm going to add a new layer and fill the layer with a pink color. You can choose whatever color you want here. Just make sure to export this as a PNG file. Now we want to find our CAS room Blender file and open that. Studio Mesh 0 is our background image or background mesh, and Studio Mesh 1 is going to be our flat mirror mesh. So here's where we want to edit and change the material. On the bottom right side of the Blender menu, we're going to find the material properties and remove the circle image. Then click Open to select the mirror glass file. We want the mirror in an upright vertical position, so we're going to select Mesh 1 and rotate it by typing RX90, then enter. This will rotate our mesh by 90 degrees along the x-axis. We're also going to move the mesh up by pressing G, then Z, and slide it up until the bottom lines up with the floor of the scene. Now we're going to scale in the mirror by pressing S, then X to scale on the x-axis, and then S and Z to shorten it a little bit. Through trial and error, I know what I want the dimensions of my mirror to be. So I'm going to press N on the keyboard to bring up the item panel on the right. And within dimensions, I want the X to be 1, I want the Y to be 2, and I want the Z to be 0. Once you make that change, bring the bottom of the mirror back to the ground. I pressed 1 on the numpad to get a front view, and then I pressed G and then Z again to move the mirror mesh. If you press 7 on the numpad, you can get a top view of the scene. Now I want to rotate my mirror, so I'm going to press R and then Z to rotate along the Z axis, and I'm going to get it to about 25 degrees. For my previous test, I know that I want my X rotation value to equal 89 degrees and my Z rotation value to equal 19 degrees. So I'm just going to key those values in the toolbar on the right. Just keep playing around with the values until you get the mirror to appear the way you would want it to appear in the game. After we save our changes, we're going to open our package file. Within the Studio tab, under Meshes, select Import to bring in your Blender file you just saved. Now the mesh is going to look a little weird because we haven't imported our textures, so our next step is going to occur within the Texture tab. In the Texture tab, we want to edit the second diffuse texture. Since we're only working with the mirror mesh for now, we will replace the circle image by importing our edited mirror glass file and then hit Save. Now open Sims and go into Create a Sim, and we're going to take a look at how the mirror looks in the game with the default flat mirror mesh settings. At first glance, the mirror's reflection does not show much of the sim at all. It mostly reflects the background of the scene. The reflective surface is aligned parallel to the ground plane. This orientation makes the mirror reflect as if it is the standard vertical wall-mounted mirror, with the reflective surface facing directly outward. Our goal is to change the X, Y, and Z values so that the sim appears in the center of the mirror's reflection or close to it. If we slightly increase the X value and compare the reflection with the default values, we can see that the mirror's reflection turns more towards the right. Slightly increasing the Y value tilts the mirror's reflection upwards and away from the ground. The Z value determines the dominance of the normal vector in the perpendicular direction of the reflective plane. Reducing the Z value makes the mirror more angled towards the ground, while increasing the Z value beyond 1 exaggerates the perpendicular alignment. You have to be careful with modifying the Z value because it can create a distorted or incorrect reflection. When you look at the mirror, the sim's reflection is directly behind it. It looks as if the sim is standing against the mirror, even though there appears to be distance between the mirror and the sim. This is because the mirror's mirror plane offset is set to 0. When we adjust this value to 0.5, we see that there now appears to be some distance between the sim and the mirror in the mirror's reflection. This is another area where you will have to test out the values to get the reflection you want to see in the CAS room. Now that we have an idea of how we want our mirror positioned and how we want the reflection to appear in the game, we can start building the room around the mirror. That will help replace the current background. Let's head back into Blender and work on editing our mesh 0. We want to start by adding a cube mesh by pressing Shift and A. In the menu, select Mesh, then Cube. As I've stated before, I have an idea of the shape I need on the right item pane. If this menu doesn't pop up on your screen, you can type the letter N and it should pop up. In the dimensions section at the bottom, set the X to 4.5, set the Y to 5, and set the Z 2.5. Now we want to determine how we want the room positioned around the mirror. I'm going to bring the bottom of the cube to the bottom of the 3D space by changing the Z location value from 0 to 1.25, which is half of the height of the cube. Then I press 7 on the numpad to go in the top view. Then I rotate my cube by pressing R on the keyboard, then Z or Z to rotate on the Z axis. And I just, adjust my mouse to get the cube into the position I want the room around the mirror. I'm going to select the mirror so that I can see the mirror's outline. To move the cube, go into top view by pressing 7 on the numpad and then press G and move your cube using your mouse. When we go into top view, we're only moving the object by the 2 visible axes, which is the X and the Y axis. So as long as we're in top view, we won't be moving the cube along the Z axis or the Z axis. I ended up deciding on a location of 0.43, negative 0.78, and 1.25 for my cube. So I'm just going to type that in. To have a better view of the model and the objects we're placing inside of it, we're going to remove part of the wall as well as part of the ceiling. You start by going into edit mode. So on your keyboard, press the tab key. Click on the wall closest to us away from the backdrop. We want to separate this part from the rest of the cube. So to do this, we will press P on the keyboard and click selection so that we can separate this panel from the rest of the cube. On the right in our scene collection, we now see this part of the cube appear as a separate object. We also want to do the same thing for the ceiling. So we're going to click on the top of the cube mesh and press P on the keyboard so that this will also appear as a separate object in our scene collection. Going back to the first panel we separated, let's add a loop cut by pressing Ctrl R. When we add the loop cut, we'll see a yellow highlighted line. You just want to slide to the right a little and then left click to lock in our cut. Go back into face select mode by pressing 3 on the keyboard and then delete the larger portion of the wall. Select the top panel, then press Ctrl R on the keyboard to add our loop cut. Drag the mouse over to the left so that the loop cut is approximately 1/3 of the width of the panel, then click to lock in the cut. We're going to add another loop cut on the right side, so press Ctrl R on the keyboard again, drag the mouse over towards the right, and lock in our loop cut. This loop cut should be a little thicker than 1/3 of the panel. When you do a loop cut, your selection mode will default to edge select. If you need to adjust the loop cuts or the placement of the edges, select the edge and press G on the keyboard, and you should be able to move your edges along the panel. We're going to add another loop cut in the opposite direction. So just do a loop cut with Ctrl R, slide your mouse to the position where you want the edge, press the left click button to lock in your new edge, as I'm doing on the screen. And as I've said earlier, the goal with the loop cut is to get more visibility into our cube. Since we won't see the entire cube in the game, we're going to remove the middle top right and bottom left panels. Go into face select mode. You can do this by pressing 3 on the keyboard. Select the middle panel and delete these faces as shown on the screen. I'm going to create a copy of my Blender file in case I make a mistake and want to go back to my previous version. If you want to, you can do that as well. Now we're going to join the modified panels back to the remaining cube. To do this, select the cube, cube 1, cube 2, and then Ctrl J to join the items together. Now that we have our desired shape, let's move the current background from the Mesh 0 object and add the new shape. While in face select mode, select the Mesh 0 object and press A, then X to delete faces. To join the cube with Mesh 0, select 0 in the scene collection, then press and hold Shift while selecting the cube object in the scene collection. The cube should be a dark orange while Mesh 0 is a bright orange. Make sure you're in object mode, then press Ctrl J and the material from the background will attach to the cube. In the scene properties at the bottom right, we want to make sure that the cut for Mesh 0 is equal to 0 and the cut for Mesh 1 is equal to 1. To test that the room covers the reflection in the mirror and doesn't need any adjustments, we're going to save our Blender file, and then we're going to go back into our CAS room package file in Synth4 Studio and import the Blender file. Open the package file in the Studio tab, select Meshes, then select Import Mesh, choose the Blender file we just saved, and click Open. As you can see, when we rotate the room in the Studio tab, some of the walls disappear. To solve this, I'm going back into the Blender file to thicken the walls. So let's open our Blender file with Mesh 0 selected, go to Modifier Properties. It will have a wrench icon, and click Add Modifier. Under Generate, select the Solidify modifier. I'm trying to zoom in to get a good view of how the modifier works. Here you can see that when we increase the thickness in the modifier, the walls will thicken. We only need to give the model's sum depth, I'm just gonna put the thickness back to 0.010. And we should be in object mode. Select the drop down to apply the modifier and save the Blender file. We're going to go back into Sims 4 Studio, import our Blender file. Now in the Studio tab, we can see that the walls do not disappear when we rotate around the room. Let's close our package file and open the CAS room in the game to see how our room looks in the game. If you look at the top left corner of the mirror, you'll notice that the room doesn't cover the sky. So we need to go back into Blender and expand this part of the ceiling. The solidify modifier is essentially adding another face to each panel. So we'll have to make sure we're selecting the entire ceiling panel while expanding it. I want to make this panel bigger, and I will scale it along the X and Y axis. To do this, I will select both the top and bottom panels and press S, then Ctrl Z. This will scale the panel and exclude the Z or Z axis, scaling the panel along both the X and Y axis. I'm just going to increase it a little bit to align the panels back into the correct position. I'm going to go into top view by pressing 7 on the numpad, press G to move and line up the corners. I saved my Blender file and tested the changes in the game and it looked good. Now I'm going to start importing my objects. For all of my objects, I'm going to save them as a package file titled test. Since we only need the mesh and the texture of the object, we won't really need the package file. So I'm just going to keep saving the objects as the test package file. To do this, click object. I want to bring in a curtain in my CAS room. So I'm going to type curtain in the search bar. I'm going to select the test package file and save or overwrite. Go into the texture tab and I'm going to select the swatch color that I want. I'm going to go into the meshes tab and click export mesh. You want to save your Blender file as your object name. I'm just going to save this as curtain. Going back into the texture tab, make sure that the diffuse texture is selected and export the image file. I just give the texture image file the same name as the Blender file. I'm just going to do this for all the other objects. To bring in the wall or floor textures, we'll need to select the build button. Make sure the type is wall. You would change this to floor for floor tiles, but I'm bringing in wall right now, so wall. I'm going to select the life and death game pack for the wall and floor. We're going to export the texture image. I'll just stick with the short height wall and I'm going to save the file as wallpaper 1. After I save all my textures, I'm going to create a transparent 4096 by 2048 PNG file in GIMP. Our goal is to combine and fit all the textures into this file. To ensure that all the images fit, I'm going to scale each layer image down to 25% of its original size. After scaling each image, I'm going to organize the layers. The wall and floor images need to be repeated so that they don't show up distorted in the game. So kind of how when you are placing the tiles in build mode in the game, you kind of want to repeat the same process in your image. The cube shape in Blender is 5 by 4.5 units, so I'm going to try to mimic that in the texture layer. Here's my end result for the texture image. I created separate spaces for 4 walls, 2 ceilings, and 1 floor. So back in Blender, let's start adding the texture to our room. When we go into edit mode and select the faces of the object, we also want to select faces within the UV editor. But as you can see, that's not happening at the moment. And this is because we need to enable the UV sync selection. And we can do that by selecting the icon with the 2 arrows pointing in the opposite direction. Now when we select a face in edit mode or the UV editor, the face is also selected in the other area. So if we select it in edit mode, it's now selected in the UV editor as well. I'm going to add more faces to the room by adding a subdivision modifier. Go into modifier properties on the right and select add modifier, then select generate and then subdivision surfaces. I'm going to select simple because I don't want to change the shape. I only want to change the cut within the faces of the object. And I'm going to keep the levels viewport at 1. As you can see, we need to be in object mode to apply the modifier. So go back into object mode, then select the drop down next to modifier and select apply. Okay, so I'm going to start lining up the room's face with the texture file. With mesh 0 selected, go into material properties on the bottom right. I expanded the preview and base sections. Also, I like to look at the shade editor when working with materials. So I'm going to change the window at the bottom of my workspace from timeline to shade editor. Shade editor will show us the nodes for the materials of each object. I'm going to unlink the existing material image by pressing the X next to the file name. Then I'm going to select open to bring in my new texture PNG file, select the image, then select the open image button. Now the image wraps around the entire object. but we don't want it to look like this, we'll have to go into edit mode to rearrange the faces of the room to fit the texture image in the UV editor. So hit tab on the keyboard to go into edit mode. We're able to select individual faces and line them up with the texture. So you can just take your mouse and do like a box selection. Starting with the smallest wall, select the face in the 3D viewport. You see the corresponding face on the UV editor? I'm going to select the entire face. Careful with selecting the face in the 3D viewport. When we added the solidifier modifier, it doubled the face of the wall, and it also created faces on the side of the wall panel. So this is why I just go into the UV editor and select everything. It's easier, in my opinion, to select it in the UV editor. The best way to select the faces of the wall is to box select the face in the UV editor. That will ensure that the entire wall is selected. Press S and X to scale on the X axis. Press G to move the face over the corresponding part of the texture image. After moving the face, I can see that the face is sideways, upside down basically. I'm going to press R to rotate the face and continue to move and scale the face until the texture shows up correctly on the object on the right in the 3D viewport. After rotating the face, a rotate menu appears on the bottom left of the screen. Click the rotate menu and change the angle to 90 degrees. It doesn't have to line up perfectly, just good enough that it looks decent, you know? At least that's my motto. In the data properties, the name of the UV map changed after I brought in my texture image. It should be named UV_0. If not, the model will not load properly in the game. If your texture image UV map is not titled UV_0, change it now. Now that the room is complete, I'm going to bring in the objects and join them to the room. To do this, go to File and select Append and bring in the Blender file of the objects you downloaded. I'm going to start with the sofa. After selecting the object, select the object folder and select all Studio Mesh files, then click Append. In the Scene collection, all of the new objects will have an orange font. Delete any rigs or bones because they're not needed. Also, sometimes a Studio Mesh will appear with a Studio Mesh name. This can also be deleted. I usually click the eye next to the object to temporarily hide it, and then this way I can see if I actually need the mesh in my game before I delete it. After bringing in the sofa and removing any unnecessary parts, when I go into edit mode, I can see how the faces line up with the texture image in the UV editor. For this object, I'm going to use the 2 burgundy circles as a guide for where the object mesh should line up with the texture. I'm going to change the object's texture to the room's texture. At the bottom in the shade editor, I'm going to select the drop down next to the material icon and change diffuse.001 to diffuse. Now press tab to go into edit mode. Press A to select all of the object's faces. Similar to how we changed the wall's texture, we will do the same here. Press S, then X to scale along the X axis, then S to scale down to a smaller size. Press G to move along. Press G to move the faces over the sofa texture. I have to scale this down some more, but I'm trying to line up the 2 circles and make sure the other faces line up correctly. Zoom into the 3D viewport to make sure the object looks good. Before joining the object to the room, it's best to place the object in the position that I want it to appear in the CAS room. To do this, I'm going to press G, then Shift and Z to move the sofa along the X and Y axes. I'm also going into top view, 7 on the number pad, and move the sofa along the X and Y axes and line the sofa up against the wall because that's where I want it. Okay, so now that I have the object correctly placed in the room, I'm going to select the object's mesh, then select the room mesh 0. I'm going to press Ctrl and J to join both objects. The newly joined mesh should maintain the name mesh 0 so that it works properly in the game. So now that we can see when we select all of the faces on the object, the faces in the UV editor correctly line up with the texture. There shouldn't be any modifiers on the object. If there are, remove them. Also double check to make sure that the scene has a cut of 0 because sometimes this changes and you just want to keep the cut so that it works correctly in the game. In the data properties, there shouldn't be any vertex groups, so if there are, remove them. In the UV editor, the UV_1 looks confusing to me, so I'm just going to leave it alone for now. Now I'm going to append remaining objects, reassign their texture to the room texture, line up the faces in the UV editor, and then join the objects with the room. At this point, I still need to bring in the windows and the mirror frame. As shown before, I'm going to append the window mesh, and I'm going to remove any unnecessary meshes and join the remaining meshes together. Then I'm going to position the window along the wall. I'm also going to duplicate the window. After getting the windows in place, I'm going to cut out part of the wall by going into edit mode and using the knife tool. Keyboard shortcut is K, or you can and select the knife option in the toolbar. If the toolbar isn't on your screen, you can press T on the keyboard and it'll appear. Make sure that the wall is an active object before doing any cuts. And then you want to use your knife tool to cut out the edges. After cutting the outline, press X and then select delete faces. And you want to make sure you have face select mode active. If not, you can press 3 on the keyboard. With the solidify modifier, our wall now has 2 faces, so I need to cut and remove the face on the front and back side of the wall. I had a hard time going around the plant, so I hid the plant's faces in the UV editor by pressing H on the keyboard. After removing the last face, I pressed Alt H to unhide the plant faces and bring the plant back. After getting the window situated, I bring in the mirror frame and line up the mirror's faces with the room texture. After bringing in the mirror frame, I added a backdrop, or I attempted to add a backdrop that will display the background seen through the window. I've changed this multiple times since the recording, but just do what works best for you. But I'm basically adding a plane mesh and adding the room material. Shift A to bring in a plane mesh, then rotate it by 90 degrees along the X-axis. Make sure to line up the faces with the background image in the UV editor and change the material image as the room's material. This will also need a solidify modifier so that it shows up in the game and there's no issues when bringing it into Sims 4 Studio. So just go to your modifier and bring in solidify modifier. Make sure to remove any modifiers, vertex groups, and double check the name of the UV map. It should be UV_0 before you save the Blender file. Save the Blender file and then go back into Sims 4 Studio, and we want to import the Blender file by selecting Import Blender Mesh under the Meshes tab, and then we want to go into the Texture tab and import the texture if any changes were made to the image. It looks okay, but I noticed that the items that should have transparency, like the plant, are black, and even here. To fix this, I need to edit the mesh in Sims 4 Studio. Open Sims 4 Studio in the Warehouse tab, select Model, go to Data, under LODs, select Edit Items, and under Meshes, select Edit Items. Our issue is in the room's mesh, not the mirror, so select Full Bright. Scroll down and select the Edit Items button under Material. Select Alpha Blend Enabled and change it to Alpha Blended. Next, we're going to change the value of the alpha mesh threshold from 0 to 100 because we want 100% full transparency on this mesh. Also, the alpha blended value should be 1. Press save and go back into Edit Items under Material. Now we can see the changes that we made. We're currently missing an alpha map, so select the diffuse map and press the copy button. Then change the field of the new map from diffuse to alpha map. The alpha map should be linked to the room's texture. This is why I copied the diffuse map, because the instance ID of the diffuse map is already linked to the room texture. So we're just going to save all our changes, close the package file, and when we reopen the package file, we'll notice that the parts surrounding the plant are no longer black. It's blue or transparent. When we open our game to test the file, I see that there's no longer an issue with the transparency. So we're good. As a final step, I'm going to add some shadows to the room mesh. That one green leaf covers this, but I noticed a few differences with the version of Blender that I'm using. So I'm just going to cover my process just in case anybody's using my version of Blender. With the room mesh selected, go to the render settings. It looks like a digital camera. Change the render image from Eve to Cycles. Find Bake and expand that section. I changed the bake type to ambient occlusion and unchecked clear image. Then I changed the margin size from 16 to 2. Now press bake. You'll see it calculating on the bottom. The new shadow image appears on the UV editor. Select the image menu and choose Save As. Give the shadow file a unique name. Switch over to your image editor and bring in the original image as well as the new shadow image on the layer for the shadows. On the layer for the shadows, I'm going to bring down the opacity to 44.5. With the shadow layer selected, I'm going to clear any shadows from places where I don't want a shadow to appear. So just box select and remove any areas where you expect there to be transparency in the game. I definitely want to remove the shadow from the window as well as the backdrop. Anything that has transparency will need the shadow removed from it. Sometimes I change the opacity back to 100 so that I can see. I'm going to change the mode on the layer from normal to multiply. I end up keeping the opacity at 26.5. Basically just play around with the settings until you get the image that you want, and then you're going to export your image as a PNG. This will be a new image texture, so give it a new name. I just hop back into Blender, and in the shade editor at the bottom, place the image by selecting the folder and clicking the new file name. If everything looks good, replace the texture in Sims 4 Studio and open CAS Room, and just like that, we're done. Thanks for watching. I hope I was able to teach you something new, and if I didn't teach you anything new at all during this entire video, make sure to hit the like button. GG's.